Just think of yourself sitting next to your husband but having your ex look right into your eyes and tell you how much he used to love you. That is not closure. What is that? That's control, dressed up as poetry. Because on this week's Sister Wives, Kody Brown didn't apologize. He rewrote history. Right in Christine Brown's and her husband David Woolley's full view. Viewer CTA. The question is, was this an apology or emotional trespassing? Comment below. There was one moment in this episode that didn't require yelling, didn't require drama music, didn't even need a reaction shot to feel uncomfortable. It just sat there. Christine is sitting beside her husband, David Woolley, calm, composed, grounded in a life she's already moved on to. Across from her is Kody Brown, the man she left behind. Not just an ex who spent years publicly withholding affection, rewriting history, and emotionally distancing himself as cameras roll. Then Kody does something that instantly makes viewers shift in their seats. He starts being sweetly romantic. Not about closure, not about accountability, but about how beautiful their relationship was, how poetic it was, magical, storms and sunsets. And all that time, David stands there. This is where the line is crossed. Because there is an unspoken rule in adult relationships that doesn't need to be taught, it's felt. When someone has moved on, when they are married, when their life is visibly rooted in a new partnership, you do not revisit emotional intimacy with them, especially not in front of their spouse, especially not on national television, especially not under the disguise of an apology. Christine's response says it all. She doesn't yell, she doesn't mock, she doesn't storm out. She does something much stronger. It is she who names the boundary. This is my husband. Why do you think this is appropriate? Your wife should be here. That reaction wasn't dramatic, wasn't cold, it was healthy. And that's precisely why such a scene would hit viewers so hard. Because, for the first time in this dynamic, Christine isn't negotiating space. She isn't asking permission to feel uncomfortable. She isn't softening her needs so Kody can remain comfortable. She's standing in a reality where emotional boundaries exist, and she's enforcing them calmly. That's what growth looks like. And it's also what exposes Kody. Because this isn't a moment about him trying to make it right. Rather, it's about him trying to get back into a space he no longer has access to. Let's be clear. An apology is not an emotional, nostalgic experience. It does not need to be in poetic terms. This does not require reminding someone of intimacy they have moved past. Apologies don't revive intimacy. They respect boundaries. And Kody didn't respect a single one of them. Note Christine's, not David's. And let's be frank, not even his own wife's, as Robin wasn't around for a conversation that never should have taken place without her. That's why this felt off immediately to viewers. Because instinctively, people could sense that this wasn't remorse. It was reframing, centering the harm. I'm sorry I hurt you. The self-centering happens when someone says, but look how beautiful it was. And what really makes this moment especially uncomfortable is the power dynamic Kody is still trying to assert, even now, even after divorce, even after Christine has remarried. By speaking sentimentally, he positions himself subtly as the narrator of their past, as if Christine still needs his interpretation of what they were. As if her experience alone isn't enough. As if the last word still belongs to him. David's presence quietly pulls that apart. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't posture. He doesn't perform. He merely is. And that is a mirror Kody doesn't like looking into. Because next to a man who doesn't need control to feel secure, Kody's words sound less like love and more like intrusion. Christine knows. David feels this, and audiences have told their time. This was no apology scene. It was a test of the boundaries, and Christine passed. But what made this apology even stranger, even more appalling, wasn't only the way Kody spoke. It was what he chose to apologize for, and what he carefully omitted. Because once you strip away the tone, the setting, and the awkwardness of David sitting right there, what you're left with is an emotional-sounding apology that says almost nothing. Instead of specifics, Kody gives us poetry. Beautiful, poetic, storms and sunsets. A special experience. And at first glance, that may sound thoughtful, even reflective. But the longer he talks, the clearer it becomes. This isn't accountability, it's verbal fog. There's a point to poetic language. It can convey feeling without committing to fact. It's a way of sounding deep while safely staying vague. And with apologies, the vagueness isn't accidental, it's strategic. Because real apologies are uncomfortable. They require naming harm. They do require admitting patterns. They require acknowledging consequences. And he does none of that here. Instead of saying, I'm sorry I abandoned you emotionally, he refers to the relationship as beautiful. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry I withheld affection," he talks about different seasons. Instead, he says, "I hurt you for years." He re-references the marriage as some sort of poetic journey. That's not contrition, that's rebranding. And that's where the gaslighting of viewers really starts in, because we didn't imagine what we watched for over a decade. We saw Christine asking for hand-holding and being told no. We saw her ask for effort and be told she was the problem. We saw her in the confessionals season after season, crying, saying she felt unwanted, unloved, and invisible. So when Kody suddenly speaks as if the relationship was some tragic love poem, it's a jarring disconnect. And here's what makes it even more revealing. We've seen Kody apologize before, just not like this. When he apologized to Janelle Brown, he was strangely specific. "I didn't have your back. I didn't speak for you. I should have done better." Those statements weren't poetic. They were not flowery. They were concrete, which proves something important. Kody knows how to apologize when he wants to. So, the question is, why not here? Why? With Christine, does everything turn abstract? Because specificity would make him acknowledge things that he does not want to name. It would mean saying, "I put a peg on you. I had other relationships that were more important at the time. I told you to stay in a marriage where I wouldn't even touch you. I made you feel unworthy." And once you say those things out loud, you lose control over the narrative. Poetry allows him to retain it. This is why fake accountability often sounds emotional but feels empty. It's designed to soothe the speaker, not heal the listener. It reframes pain as mutual, inevitable, something no one is really responsible for. It was just a very complicated experience. It was beautiful in its own way. There were good days and bad days. All of that subtly shifts the blame away from choices and onto circumstance. And Christine doesn't buy it. You can see it in the way she carries herself. You can hear it in her tone. She has not been moved. She is not nostalgic. And neither is she softened, because she's already done the work of grieving this marriage, once without him. That's the part that seems to elude Kody. He's apologizing for something that assumes Christine is still trapped in the pain, still validating, still trying to find meaning in it. She's not. She's on the other side of it, which makes his poetic reflections feel not just hollow but late. And here's the retention truth that hits the hardest. Apologies become vague until accountability disappears. Because unless you can name what you did, you can't promise to do better. And if you can't promise to do better, the words of apology are just noise. That is why viewers are getting frustrated. Not because Kody apologized, not because he almost apologized. He circled it, he aestheticized it, he intellectualized it, but he never actually stepped in it. And once you start replaying what we actually saw for 15 years, the negligence, the partiality, the affective withdrawal, the poetry collapses. What's left over isn't a love story that's misunderstood. It's a man trying to soften the past so he doesn't have to own it. Here's the thing with rewriting history on reality television. The cameras already wrote it for you. On Sister Wives alone, for well over a decade, audiences didn't just hear what Kody Brown said about his marriage to Christine Brown, they watched how he behaved. And from the very beginning, there was something not quite right. Christine wasn't one of those women who became suddenly unhappy toward the end. She was unhappy early, season 1 early. Back when the show was still trying to sell plural marriage as functional, Christine was already voicing loneliness and insecurity, emotional neglect. That matters, because it establishes a pattern, not a phase. She wasn't asking for luxury. She wasn't seeking special treatment. She wanted simple affection returned. Hand-holding, reassurance, presence, and time and again, she had been told no. It's punctuated by one moment longtime viewers will never forget. Christine asking Kody to hold her hand, and him refusing. Not because he couldn't, not because he didn't notice, but because he didn't want to. That single action said more than any confessional ever could. For the affection withheld is power, and it did not stop there. Intimacy had, physical proximity was no more. Their emotional availability stopped. Christine was not handled like a wife. She was handled like a burden that Kody did not want to oversee. And when she hurt, the remedy did not come with empathy. It came with instruction. Be more lovable. Be more respectful. Be less difficult. Such a story had been following her for years. He didn't ask questions like, how can I be seen or appear in this relationship better? Instead, he characterized all of Christine's needs as issues with her. If only she could modify some things about herself, such as her ways of behaving, speaking, and expecting, maybe she would deserve the relationship that she is looking for. That's not partnership. That's conditional affection. There is also the case of children. Because when you talk about receipts, you can't ignore Truly. You can't ignore Isabel. You can't ignore the repeated instances where Kody's absence wasn't just symbolic, it was literal. These are the struggles that Christine has had to contend with in raising her children. She has had to raise the kids without the presence of immediate support in pregnancy and post-delivery. The illness in the Truly family has accentuated the fact that Brown has been out of touch with the activities in the Christine household. The surgery involving Isabel marked the turning point, not just because, when Christine needed him most, he wasn't there. Approximately 500 people. So when Kody refers to a beautiful experience and poetic seasons, this is violently out of sync with what people actually recall. Not due to any bias in memory, but due to public evidence. Christine said the same thing, season after season, in different ways. I don't feel loved. I don't feel chosen. I don't feel valued. However, none of these assertions were ever given due attention. That's why the rewrite falls flat. Because rewrites can only succeed if the original narrative was unclear. This one wasn't. You don't get to wipe out a decade just because it's inconvenient for you, particularly when it is a decade that also contains confessionals, group scenes, arguments, and breakdowns, all of which leave a clear indication that this marriage was on its deathbed before it actually died. It is what exactly Kody is doing that is so exasperating, in that he is asking for something that Christine has already given, which is the reframing of her pain for the convenience of the other. He's not asking her to remember the truth. A narrator could say this. He wants her to recall an account that exonerates him. This, however, raises the true issue for this session. Because if Christine is obviously healed, if she's obviously moved on, if she's obviously not looking for self-validation, why does Kody require her to remember things differently? What is so significant about his concern to soften the past, to beautify it, to reframe it? Because memory is power. And so long as Christine has her own and the truthful version, Kody no longer has the ability to control the story. At this point, the question that many of us are thinking isn't why this apology to Brown families feels off, but rather why this man has never been able to deliver a real apology in the first place. Because at this point, the question isn't wordage. It isn't timing. It isn't even denial, it's something more. Effective apology work begins with this fundamental skill: empathy. No sympathy, lack of regret for consequences. The power to imagine, even temporarily, what someone else may have felt as a result of your action. But this is precisely where Kody Brown falls short. When Kody apologizes, he does not enter Christine's pain. He moves around his own experience of the situation. Even then, the admission of guilt is couched in terms of his own journey, his confusion, the pressure he is under, or what he thinks spiritually. Listen carefully to how he speaks. I was nervous. I was trying to live the principle. I didn't know better. I felt pressured by plural marriage. Those do not represent harm caused. Self-justification can be, and that's the crucial difference. A remorse-based apology is as follows. I hurt you. You always. And you never. I was struggling. One places the victim. The other recenters the speaker. The other, even when Kody asserted he played the victim, notice what is absent. He does not explain how he experienced the effects of being the victim on Christine. It's just isolated with no context of how it affected Christine's sense of identity and empowerment, which reveals something quite telling. He may intellectually comprehend criticism, but not emotionally. This explains the performative quality of his apology. These apologies are influenced by what he knows he ought to be saying, and not by his feeling. And this, of course, relates directly to the victim identity that Kody has maintained for all these years. Victimhood, for someone such as Kody, is not vulnerability, but armor. If he's the victim, then his anger is justified. His neglect is self-protection. His cruelty becomes a reaction, not a choice. Victim identity protects him from accountability, in that every challenge is seen as something that was done to him, as opposed to being something he made. That explains why his apologies rarely ring true. Taking the blame means stripping away that armor, but the real man, the one behind the armor, is a face of himself that he does not want to confront. And then comes religion. Kody will make frequent mention of concepts such as faith, principle, destiny, and belief when justifying his actions. The selectiveness of these applications should be noted. The practice of plural marriage is justified using the concept of faith. Faith is used as the means to condone the lack. Faith helps in explaining difficult decision options. However, faith is not usually used to call for humility in himself. In most belief structures that Kody alleges to cherish, the act of repentance isn't something that is artistic or general. Repentance, in this case, entails confession, recognition of the negative impact, and changing the manner in which one acts. However, when it comes to his personal deed, this isn't the case. Religion becomes a frame of reference for explanation rather than transformation, and this selective morality supports the narcissistic cycle. I was following something greater than myself, thus, I could not be totally wrong. This also renders true apology impossible, because genuine remorse would be the acknowledgement of the fact that he chose himself over others more than once. His own ego was more important than a partnership. His own comfort was more important than Christine, and he cannot sit with that either. But this again brings us back to the core fact of this session. The one who can't touch your pain will never take responsibility for causing it. There is nothing wrong with his use of, there is no emotional access to him. He's not saying sorry to Christine, instead, he apologizes for her. And this contrast becomes hard to overlook when you consider who was sitting quietly alongside her. Because, whereas Kody is filling the room with explanations, metaphors, and self-reflection, there's David, not interrupting, not posturing, not rewriting history, simply present. Before this conversation comes to its end, something has clearly happened, not due to what has been said, but due to the silent presence of whom. During the conversation, David Woolley does not compete with Kody Brown. He does not attempt to one-up him. He doesn't raise his voice. Even space he doesn't claim. Asterisk, beginning with his first novel. And that's the difference. Kody's presence has never been subtle, authority-infused, commanding attention. Even his apologies come with explanations, with metaphors, with drama. Power in this family, for so long, looked like control, to speak last, to narrate the story, to determine the important. David is coming from an altogether different perspective. He guards instead of acts. Protection doesn't need to be in the spotlight. It doesn't need to be validated or recognized. It certainly doesn't need to assert dominance. But protection will be found in stability, awareness of boundaries, holding back when challenged or offended. And in this case, David's control says far more than anything that Kody says. Because while Kody is living in the past, David is well aware that he is living in the present. Where Kody is framing meaning, David is living it. David is in no way needing to remind Christine of what she had, he is showing her what she has. As a result, validation for Christine is no longer a necessity. This is the quiet revolution of the scene. For the better part of the series, Christine was asking for acknowledgement, asking for choice, asking for consequence. The woman needed reassurance because she was not finding it in the relationship she was in. The tone of her voice was one of need. Now it doesn't. She doesn't cut off Kody while correcting him. She does not dispute his version of history. She does not beg him to understand. She just doesn't need his approval. This is what healing looks like. Not engagement, but detachment. And Kody realizes this. And indeed, one can feel the searching in his words to make a point that never quite comes. The searching as he talks with the hope that his wife can still relate to his understanding of their marriage. It doesn't, as the dynamic has shifted. In this case, the loss suffered by Kody, relevance, his was the center around which all other relations revolved. His emotions were the thermometer by which all other emotions were measured. His opinions established the parameters. His side of the story mattered. In this case, it doesn't. He's no longer the expert in Christine's life. Now he's a footnote mentioned, but certainly not central to the narrative. Speaking rather than steering. At least, now, in this moment, he's trying to control an ending that's occurred without his input. And that is the final truth of this episode. This conversation was not closure for Christine. She had already closed that chapter. Neither was it healing for Kody, as healing would have included accountability, and he did not enter into that process in any way. What this scene actually was exposure. The contrast of holding performative power and being nonverbal strength, of control versus care, of needing expression versus being confident enough to listen. David didn't win by saying more, he won by being different. As a result, Kody was no longer able to compete because this was no longer a competition. It was the end. Not the dramatic kind Kody likes, but the most tragic form, in the case of someone like him. The kind where the plot just keeps moving along without you. This was no apology. It was a goodbye that Kody was not able to master. As for me, even if I weren't thinking,